So good afternoon, everybody. At this point in the day, we all get a little kind of ootsy. So why doesn't everybody just stand up and give a big stretch? Stand up. It's park stuff. We'll give a big stretch. All right. That feels kind of good. We've been inside. Most of us have been inside all day. Right on. Well, it is a true honor to be here. My name is Phil Ginsburg. I have the great pleasure of serving as the general manager of San Francisco's Recreation and Park Department. And I'm very excited to moderate this afternoon's presentation on design innovation for civic spaces. You know, too often in my role as a department head, too much of my week is spent reacting to the latest crisis and latest opportunity. So to have the chance to be here with all of you, to be with thinkers, to learn from, first of all, this amazing park system, and all of the panelists and people who are here is a really amazing pleasure. And I want to give a special shout out to Mitch Silver and to Nancy Price, who I'm going to introduce in a second, for inviting me and having me moderate this panel. I came in yesterday and I had a classic parks day. In one day, I did a bike loop around Central Park, spent a half hour with Mitch talking parks, took a tour of the Brooklyn Bridge Park with Matt Urbanski from Michael Van Valkenburg, and then met up with Adrian Benepe on the High Line. I mean, that is a day, and created for me what we call in San Francisco a little bit of New York envy. You have an amazing, amazing park system, and we have lots of similarities in terms of the percent of parkland that we share, the park acres per capita, and the percentage of population with walkable park access. These are truly amazing stats for San Francisco and New York. We also share quite a few challenges. I heard Mitchell Silver say that we are going to New York is welcoming 700,000 new people to New York City. In San Francisco, we're much smaller. We will be welcoming 300,000 new visitors over the next 25 years. In both our cities, affordability, accessibility, equity, resiliency are big challenges. So how do we innovate? I looked up the word. We all know what it means, but I looked it up. It says the definition of innovation is to make changes in something established, especially by introducing new methods or ideas. There has been lots of wonderful discussion today about the important role that parks play in cities. My favorite moment of the day is this morning when we discussed parks as more than just sweet amenities. They're fundamental infrastructure and, frankly, fundamental utilities to ensuring the quality of life in big cities. But how are we going to meet tomorrow's challenges? And how do we innovate through design? And we have a truly amazing panel today, and I'm going to introduce them and tell you how the session is going to go, and then I'm going to get off the stage. This panel combined, and don't take this the wrong way, has more than 100 years of design experience in parks. It's really pretty amazing. Their full bios are in our beautiful program, so I'm going to spare them, but I want to introduce Nancy Prince, who's the Deputy Chief of Design for New York City Parks Department. Many of you know her. Hold on, I'm going to introduce everybody else, Nancy. 1 second. And then following Nancy, we're going to hear from Kinder Baumgardner, who's the Managing Principal and President of SWA in their Houston office. Then we have Jamie Maslin Larson from West 8 Urban Design and Landscape Architecture, who's going to follow. Welcome, Jamie. And lastly, we have Eugenie Birch, who's the co-director of the Penn Institute for Urban Research. And after Nancy, Kinder, and Jamie speak, Eugenie's going to come up and offer some reflections on what she's heard. And she's going to just kind of riff, which I think is pretty cool. And my favorite part of Eugenie's bio is that she runs every day in Central Park, and I run every day in Golden Gate Park. I call it MBRO, Management by Running Around. My staff hates it. And then after Eugenie offers her reflections, I'm going to get back up, moderate a little bit of discussion, and take some questions. So without further ado, let's welcome Nancy.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about design at New York City Parks, just to set the framework for this conversation. As you know, we do have a lot of property, and it's a lot of variety. In Capital Projects Division, that's the division that takes care of design and construction, we have more than 500 active projects right today. Last year, we started work on more than $600 million worth of park improvements. We have a whole bunch of different types of projects. Of course, we have lots and lots of playgrounds. We have multi-use courts. Often these are associated with schools, and we're really looking to do some more creative things in these areas. We have lots of basketball courts and ball fields. We have an incredible number of synthetic turf fields that we're putting in. That's really addressing the growing interest in soccer in the city. And this allows us to have soccer be played all year. And of course, we have, in the last, I'd say 10 years, we have about a bit more than 25 new skate parks, and we've been working with skaters to design these. So it's very exciting. They really attract a lot of teens and young adults. But what we see in parks is women and older people, there's not that much for physical activity, so we were looking for new programming for them. And so we're really developing a lot of new outdoor fitness areas. And these are like your indoor fitness gym, but there's no membership fee, the view is great, you're in the park. And this has really attracted a lot of older adults and more women than we see in some of our other facilities. And of course, we include lots of gathering spaces. The days where you wouldn't want to put, or we were told not to put benches in the Bronx, those days are gone. And we're really extending our bike network. This one you see on the left is a new connection between the South Bronx and all the recreation on Randall's Island. That's done by Matthews Nielsen. And Olmsted and others have left us a lot of malls and parkways, and we can really look to those to connect our parks, so we're looking at those in a new light. Of course, we have a lot of waterfront properties, and a lot of that property came to us from previous industrial uses. You can see Pier 42. We also have miles and miles of boardwalks, which unfortunately really got hit in Superstorm Sandy. And you can see on the other side, you can see our new Rockaway boardwalk that's concrete, it's resilient, it's going to last. And we're taking some of those industrial waterfront sites and returning them to marsh to make the city healthier. And you can see this Harlem River where we've taken down the bulkhead and made that softer and greener. We have some historic properties that we're repurposing. This is Fort Totten, which we really invited the public into. And of course, we have a lot of historic parks and properties that we either rehabilitate or restore. This is a pretty new park in Long Island City. And this is the pressures you have on our parks. It's the park for the neighborhood. And over the last couple of years, we've been reconstructing it in various phases. And you can see it has something for everybody. It has gathering space, it has a lawn for relaxing, a playground, sports fields. And this is, real estate is so dear in New York City that this is what happens when we're trying to accommodate so many people, but it's really popular. It's got something for everybody. Some of our major initiatives, Commissioner Silver talked about Parks Without Borders, so I won't go into too much detail into that, except that I'll quote him in saying, the New York City public doesn't know when they're stepping from DOT, Department of Transportation property, to Parks property. So we're really trying to blur those boundaries and bring the beauty of the park out into the street. So those are some examples here. And then in the last little while, we've really been focusing on equity. And to do that, we looked at areas of the city where we had not spent a lot of capital money. These areas, we also looked at areas that had high concentrations of poverty, density, and growth. And last year we did designs for 35 parks in these neighborhoods. And this is a typical example. This park on the left, that was the park, we transformed that into a multi-use community space. Of course, we've been focusing on managing our stormwater on site, and we're doing new things and taking some of the stormwater from adjacent streets. That's a new initiative. And of course, Superstorm Sandy was a real wake-up call. So we're working on a multi-agency effort to look at resiliency in the city. Next year, we'll be coming out with our design and planning for the flood zone, where we really look at what type of facilities belong in the flood zone and what type of materials will work best. Some of our key design principles. This year, we began to have our scope meetings at night. We began to really publicize them, invite the community, and they've been incredibly well attended. We also go back and check with the community with schematics to make sure we've delivered what they told us. Because we have a pretty rich capital budget right now, but taking care of all this property is a real strain on maintenance. So when we're designing, we're really looking for thoughtful design that's done in easy-to-maintain materials. We're looking to really add a lot more green to our park and to think of the context. We have beautiful parks from the Moses era, some really classic ones from Moses and Olmsted. And when we're doing a little piece of a park, we think of how to make that new piece fit in seamlessly. And we're trying to go beyond the Americans with Disabilities Act and really incorporate universal design where everybody can be totally involved in the park. I'll go quickly. When we're doing a playground, rather than plop in play equipment, we like to do a whole environment. So I'll quickly, you saw some of the creative play we did. You might have seen it this morning. And we're really designing for the diversity that is New York. New York's getting more diverse, and so we're designing for new uses, new populations, and we're always looking to other cities to see what they're doing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kinder, who will talk about some work in Texas. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not live tweeting here. I'm just trying to make sure I stay on time. That's it, not line. Start. Okay. So this guy from Houston, Texas, what's he going to teach us about parks, right? Put freeways up instead, right? Actually, oddly enough, we're in the process of tearing down miles of major freeway infrastructure that goes around downtown Houston right now. So, and we're turning that into parks. So, made in Houston, that's kind of my topic here. So if you live in downtown Houston and you drive to work in the morning, there's inspirational messages on infrastructure, right? That's what we do there. We do infrastructure, and we do it well. The whole city's built out of infrastructure. It's carved out of that. And some projects that we've done recently, we've taken parts of the city that have no infrastructure, no community infrastructure, and we've looked at mobile ways of putting that in, places that flood, lower income neighborhoods where you can't pay a parking ticket, right? And that can create big issues for certain people. So we're trying to figure out how we can do that in a mobile way. In Atlanta, we've worked with infrastructure there where we've taken in the process of taking their Interstate 75-85 corridor and turning it into the Museum of Freeway Art, which is complicated and interesting. This is the big freeway project in downtown Houston that encircles downtown. And the idea there is to basically take freeway space, figure out how to reconsider where it goes, but also turn it into public space, right? It may still be a freeway, but think about it as public space. And that might be thinking about the types of plants you use, the types of overlooks where people can see a freeway or not, all those kinds of issues. We also take infrastructure there, and we take power lines and pipelines and rail corridors and bayous, and we turn those into the fabric of our open space system. And I'll talk about a couple of projects in a minute that do that. And that's just the kind of stuff that you get, right? So this is traditionally would be just a power line corridor. We worked with the state legislature recently to pass a major bill that would allow bicycle paths to be built in under power line corridors. Traditionally, you couldn't do that because of liability issues. That has changed now. So you can get this kind of place. We work with flood control to take just a dumb old Houston ditch, right, which floods from time to time, and turn that into a place like this where people can actually use it in different ways. Always looking at ways to layer infrastructure so that you have more than one use there. So Houston is infrastructure. The reason that Houston is there, this was the foot of Main Street, probably in 1920, something like that. A lot of the city has changed, but this is Buffalo Bayou. And this is a little further down Buffalo Bayou today, right? It's the Houston Ship Channel, and that's why Houston is there, that kind of infrastructure. So, the plastics and stuff that we're using here was probably made in Houston and then shipped all across the country. But we have huge freeway systems, of course. We have our water systems. They're all owned by different entities. If you want to just plant a tree somewhere, figuring out who owns the land of where that tree would go is extremely complicated and time-consuming. But over the years, we've figured out how to do it, mainly through just making really great partnerships with these different entities. So there's Houston. There's all the sort of pipeline infrastructure and corridors that spread out across the United States. So if you think about infrastructure and you think about landscape, right, there's three kind of basic things that infrastructure does, right? Government has a role in providing infrastructure. Infrastructure is equally accessible to communities, right? So electricity, gas pipelines, and infrastructure generates spillover gains, right? So people can, their life changes when suddenly they have electrification, or if there's new internet service, things like that, right? But if you think about it, those things all equate pretty tightly with parks as well, right? It's not just a power line or a pipeline that do those things. Parks should do those things. And if you start to think about parks as infrastructure, as landscape infrastructure, just kind of viewing a park through that lens changes the conversation dramatically. It may be the same dumb old park, but as you go about thinking about how you use it, how you operate, how you maintain it, it starts to change. So Houston has a pretty big park system, and you can see Houston across there is about 75 miles across. Our city is about 4 million people, 10 million people, or 6 million, sorry, in the metropolitan area. But most of our park space is on the west side of town. And there's a lot of it, but it's kind of hard to get to it. If you live on the east side of town, it might be more difficult to get to where you want to go. So we recently passed a bond measure. It's a $300 million bond measure in the city of Houston, a place that hates taxes, right? Houstonians don't want to do that, or Texans. But they decided to tax themselves to build new parks. And those parks end up in our infrastructural systems, and that's what we're trying to do today. So, everyone knows Houston's very car-centric. This is kind of the issues we have. There's a lot of obesity issues and diabetes. We have issues with physical people getting outside and doing things. The idea of Bayou Greenways is to reconnect things, right? So this Bayou system becomes reconnected, and it makes a very different kind of place, much more access to open space for people. So the new map of Houston that used to be about freeways suddenly becomes a map that's about nature and open space. It's taken a long time to do it. 100 years we've been talking about this. We're finally getting there. But at the end of the day, 6 in 10 Houstonians will now live within a mile and a half of a park. That's a pretty big deal in Houston. And nature is a big part of those parks. Buffalo Bayou Park, this was kind of the thing that started that. So little successes lead to big successes, right? So this was kind of that little success, was Buffalo Bayou Park. We took a space that looked like that. It's flood control infrastructure, freeway infrastructure. And if you go there today, it looks like this. And this is just a few years later, right? It's art. There's big leafy trees. It's a beautiful place. It's now the heart of the city, and it's the new identity of what Houston's about, spaces like this. Beautiful, interesting, different types of play areas that are inspired by the bayou. And we found topography. Houston's dead flat. Suddenly there's a place where you can go down a hill, but be careful when you go down that hill, because these spaces are designed to flood. So that might be an aerial view of Houston on a day like today, but tomorrow at the drop of a hat, it's going to look like this. So these spaces are designed to do multiple things, right? As soon as that water recedes, the cleanup crews are out there, and it works really, really well. You guys have this park, right, which is probably a problem, because everybody that comes to New York thinks of that park. Internationally, that's what you think of. That's the park in New York, right? So other parks probably struggle because of this one. It's great to see that things are starting to change and people are really respecting all of the parks throughout the city. But it's a good way to think about a park, historic park in an antique city, right? It's kind of carved out of this urban space. You have this green thing there. And it doesn't necessarily connect other places. That's what we've been thinking about in Houston, is how to make things connect. So there's your park system, extremely robust, parks everywhere. But what we like to do is start to think about wildlife infrastructure. We think about pollinators. We think about urban forestry when you design a park. Wetlands, all the sort of things like that, so that in Houston, we've strung those concepts of infrastructure together. And this is just, the what-if map of how New York can do the same sort of thing by thinking about connectivity in a much more robust way. You can take places like this and turn them into simple things like that. It's cheap, it's quick, right? It's just simple things about thinking about infrastructure as a way to inform that park. So that's my bit. Jamie, I think you're next.
All right. Hello. Thank you for having me and everyone else. It's been a really inspiring day, and I felt like it was, so brought tears to my eyes seeing all those parks getting awarded. It was very inspiring. My name's Jamie Maslyn Larson. I'm a partner at West 8 Landscape Architects here in New York, and we are founded in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. So we've spent a lot of time talking about the future of parks and where parks are now, but this year is, this decade, this era is far from the City Beautiful movement when we could decide where to plan these park spaces for a future city. What we're left over today with parks planning and design is these leftover remnant spaces, former industrial sites. Sometimes they're brownfields, sometimes they're severed by their communities, and this is our source of inspiration. This is what we need to stitch back and connect to people. And these are our tools of innovation. So we have dirt, or soil as we call it, as landscape architects. We have trees, and we have ground plane material. So how we work with these tools makes park design. But the other layer, of course, is a program or a brief from our clients. And this is where we, as park designers, become interpreters of what that look and feel can be. And it's always through the listening of the community and through the client that we try to interpret what that aspiration can look like on the ground, so we don't end up with this. This is a project of ours in Spain. It's the transformation of about 7 miles of waterfront, and I absolutely love this picture because it really just tells the whole story of what we want to achieve in parks design. You have a man sitting on a bench with a tree behind his back, comfortable in the shade, with a walkway right in front where he can check out the action. So that's really all you need to make a successful park. And I think we've heard that sort of over and over and over today, is creating the condition for people to see each other and be relaxed is sort of the ultimate goal of the designer, at least for our practice. Now, the execution of that can take 1,000 different forms, and I'm just going to walk you through some of our work to sort of show how that constant awareness of the context, the people who are going to use this, and the brief really help shape these unique spaces. This is a project of ours in Rotterdam. It's incredibly simple. It's just a plaza, a blank slate plaza with some lighting on the edge. It's really creating a condition where there's people sitting in one corner and a blank slate plaza in the middle, and it's very much programmed in 1,000 different ways year-round, so it becomes the see and be seen kind of place of Rotterdam. And it really kind of, this was finished in '91, so it really kind of, I think some people think set a new kind of tone for the way urban spaces are. There's no green here. It's totally hardscape. Another project of ours is the design of some bridges in Amsterdam, and this is infrastructure, but it's also play, right? And when we show this to our American clients, they freak out. But we can't control this outcome. We just make something that evokes a kind of identity. Our wave decks in Toronto are a little more mellow, but still, how people sit and inhabit those spaces and can feel comfortable and open and inviting is really important to us. A couple projects in the United States, Soundscape in Miami Beach, Florida, was once a parking lot very close to the beaches, close to Lincoln Road Mall. To the right of the screen is a new building that was designed by Frank Gehry. It's the New World Symphony Building, and Michael Tilson Thomas had a vision that we would project the orchestra music that would be played inside into the park so that it would make a kind of highbrow event into a very accessible experience so that you could grow audiences and new audiences. So this is what the project looked like when we started. It was a blank slate with a parking lot in front. And we said, we can't really design around that program because we really needed to make the park successful day to day. In Miami, it meant shade. So rather than starting with a program that sort of plopped, uses down, we started by making a beautiful day-to-day park that organized itself towards the building, but it didn't dominate the experience. So day-to-day, it's nice and shady. And then in the evenings, when they're projecting the concerts or movies, it's totally casual and really fun. And I just had some statistics from our client that they've done some surveys and actually have expanded their audiences from for these events for the orchestra from ethnically diverse audiences. It went from 12% to 34% non-white audiences. It's a much younger crowd. It went from 30% to 70% under the age of 60. And the number, the top two reasons for people to be there was to experience the music, to spend time with family, but just also to enjoy the park and be outside. It's really cool, and it's fun, and it's just easygoing. And that's sort of what we like in parks. Here in New York, we've been working for the last 100 years on the design of Governor's Island. We won a competition in 2007, and we opened the first phase to the public in 2014, and we're opening the second phase, The Hills, July 19th. Mark your calendars, you are invited. Governor's Island is very different from all the parks that were discussed today because it's literally an island. There is no neighborhood there. It was closed off and literally off maps for New Yorkers because it was a military base. When it was turned over to the city and the state, it was decided to take this underutilized facility and begin a transformation that would start with a park and lead towards the redevelopment of the island. Again, we had the challenge that we weren't connected to people that knew how to get here, who to get here. We didn't have an audience. We didn't have a constituency. And so our attitude was a little bit turned around in terms of the image that Kinder showed on Central Park. One of the great joys of this opportunity, though, was that you could get away. So we took this sense of decompression by getting there by ferry as a great opportunity to relax and almost, instead of having it as a neighborhood park, we started using the word staycation. And this is a sketch from Audrey Noises, who's the design director. What he envisioned was really creating a park with enough gusto and monumentality that it would be kind of in dialogue with the skyscrapers of Lower Manhattan. But what we did, because we really didn't have an audience, is we started with our amazing client, the Trust for Governor's Island, by bringing people to the island and asking them, what do you want to do here? And we had thousands of sticky notes, surveys, blogs. We tested and piloted ideas. We had everything from punk rock day festivals and Civil War reenactments in a single weekend. So, and then we piloted programs like the Bike and Roll, and this was before the city bikes. So we learned a lot in how to implement some of these programs. And what we learned was that this constituency was there. So within a few years, we had 500,000 people coming out to the island, and there was no Starbucks, there was no restaurants, there was not even drinking water. You had to bring your own water, and people were coming because of this context. And that's what we based the design around, is this unique and special context. The perimeter experience was a 2.5-mile walkway along the water's edge. Our sense of that was that we really didn't need to do much except make a beautiful balustrade and allow these romantic moments to happen. But everybody loves biking around and around the edge, and it's a fun place to learn how to ride a bike. The interior park was all about lifting the topography out of the future flood elevation and shaping and sculpting that in a very Olmstedian way to dramatize and take advantage of these off-site views. And then we framed it all with precast so that it has this sort of Wizard of Oz yellow brick road effect and frames the off-site views and really sort of captures the spirit of the New York Harbor. In this first phase area, we talked a lot about play, and I wanted to just talk about this specifically today because of playgrounds that are so ingrained in the way New York City is. But we never called them playgrounds, we called them play. And we sort of opened our eyes to what play could be here and even opened up who could be using those. So we have no fences around our play area. We have play areas which are more traditional in a sense, but we also have play that's more relaxed and fun for all sorts of ages and abilities. And of course, the hammocks have become wildly popular. And, you know, kids use these in ways we never imagined. And the third sort of big move with the park design is the part that's opening this summer, the hills. And this is the culmination of the topography I was mentioning, where this is how New Yorkers see their city from a high elevation. It's concrete, it's fascinating, it's interesting, but you also have to pay a ticket. So what we imagined was that here on Governor's Island, you'd see, we would make large hills so that you could get up and above and see that actually New York's skyline is also a waterfront skyline. And these hills are in construction right now. We're almost done. But we also created a kind of a peak, you know, a sequence of spaces that made it rather dramatic to experience it. These are some pictures from last week. And again, it's going to open this summer. We hope you will come and see the new skyline of New York.
Thank you for these wonderful talks, and thank you for this beautiful day when we've been looking at so many very important local decisions that are making our cities very livable. What I'd like to do is reflect upon these three presentations we've had from the point of the global conversations that are occurring right now, and to show how what you're doing is really important for what a lot of other people need to be thinking about doing around the world. And let me give you just a few pieces of data as we do this. We heard, of course, that New York will be accepting 700,000 more people and needs to address to that. But the world is going to be accepting 3.5 billion more people in urban areas. And how will they do that? It means that cities, particularly at cities of the global south, have to consider building the equivalent of a city for 1 million every week for the next 40 years. A city of 1 million every week for the next 40 years. And how will they build those cities? What will be the important building blocks of those? The conversations that are happening now through the United Nations and other discussions are addressing this issue. Just this past fall, the United Nations and 193 member states passed something called the Sustainable Development Goals. And in that, they had a goal for cities, and in that, they had a goal that called for the provision of public space for all. Next fall, Habitat 3, the once every 20-year conference on cities, will be occurring. And in that will be a declaration of the member states to think about how to build cities. It'll be called the New Urban Agenda. So what we've been seeing here are some terrific ideas that could be shared around the world. And let me address what everyone has told us about today and with this idea in hand. First of all, we all know the critical importance of public space. And public space is defined broadly, thank heavens, by a Parks Commissioner who talks about parks without borders. It's defined broadly as the streets, the public parks, the squares, the recreational grassy areas, public playgrounds, and so forth. And it's talked about broadly as a system within a city, not just independent blocks of open space. So, and it's talked about as being people-centered, which is absolutely critical. So as the New Urban Agenda gets written, it's going to have 3 commitments. One commitment is to leave no one behind. The second one is to achieve sustainable and inclusive prosperity in cities. And the third one is to foster ecological and resilient cities. So how did what we learned today are the ideas contributing to these 3 commitments? First of all, Nancy told us a very important thing, that we are in a city that is investing in its public space. It's not letting it go away. It's investing in very important ways, and it's investing in a way to adjust to the changing demography, both from the point of view of different backgrounds and of people of different ages and needs. We are seeing that the city is investing in it as a system, so terribly important. We are seeing that the city is investing in terms of resilience and adaptation. It's investing as it understands what density is, and it is investing through a planning process. From Kinder, we learned a very important thing that we can share with the world, and that is we need to think about public space as part of infrastructure. We need to get out of the silos and bring the ideas together. If we're building streets, if we're building infrastructure, we build parks at the same time. And we need to show in our world how we can adjust the misguided ideas, unfortunately, of the past to meet the needs that we have today for health, for resilience, for biodiversity. And from Jamie, we learned about the tools of landscape architecture. We learned about people thinking, people-centered thinking. We learned about social cohesion and the role of parks in that. And we could see very clearly how they support the 3 aspects of sustainability. And lastly, again, the use of local knowledge and expert knowledge to make a more sustainable city. So the work that is happening here has global importance. There's a lot to be shared, and I think it's an extremely exciting thing that we've seen with these peer-to-peer learning across the cities. Thank you.
All right. Just another round of applause for Jeannie. I call it that is intellectual improvisation, is what that was. Very impressive. All right, so I want to ask the panelists a couple of questions, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time. I'm being told that 10 minutes. So we'll do 5-6 minutes of discussion, and then maybe take a minute or 2 of questions. I want to get back to the name of the panel, which is really focused on innovation. And in all of your presentations, you gave examples of innovative design. Nancy, you talked about, you mentioned synthetic turf fields. You also obviously referred to the Parks Without Borders initiative. Kinder, you talked about converting freeways into parks. And Jamie, you had that crazy risky thing, the red thing that you jump off of that said nobody in the United States would ever. So innovation is kind of hard. In San Francisco, we have a little bit of a phrase: we are a progressive city that hates change. And so my question is to lead this off. Actually, is who leads when you're innovating? Is it the designer or the community? And how do you do that dance?
Well, for me, I mean, I would say it's both, right? You can't have
That's
it
the
one
easy
way or the
answer,
other,
Kinder.
right? All right. The designer leads it, of course. That's what we do. I mean, usually what I find is that there's all these ideas that you think you invented as a designer, and they've been floating around in the community for years and years and years, right? And so that's why you have to stop and talk to people, because it is easy to think you invented something that you didn't. And you need to give credit to lots of different people if you want something to happen. Trying to take credit as a designer, like I did that, I invented that, that's all me, usually doesn't lead to great things. You need to give it back to the community if you really want something to happen. And that was the success of the Bayou Greenways project, is that it started out with just seriously drawing stuff on, napkins and envelopes, and then turning that into a huge, huge bond measure, which meant community, right? Get people to vote to do something. So you got to push it back there, or it doesn't happen.
Great. Other quick comments, or I'll go on to the next question.
I think that's an
It's like a speed round.
interesting question. I think the Rockaway Boardwalk is an example for us. 2 guys in the community had this idea of writing the word Rockaway because they wanted to get economic activity down there and get people to come back to the Rockaway, and you could see it from the air. So the designers who were working for us took that idea that, came from the community and then made it come alive. And I think sometimes those ideas go back and forth. And if you have a good communication and a good way to engage the community, you can get really creative ideas.
Great. Okay, next question. So what do you all think is the most important, and you can only pick one, the most important challenge facing cities today that you design to address? Jeannie, you can jump in here
Okay.
because,
Is all cities of the world or just
well,
cities
we're all
that-
diverse and we all have unique problems, but there are some common links to urban cores and urban
let's
centers.
look at the developing world. I think the biggest challenge developing world is creating the frame for the public investment, so create the frame for private investment. So that part of that frame is the whole infrastructure that we're talking about, the systems we're talking about, the water system, the park system, street system, and so forth. And what I liked about these discussions was the thinking that brings these systems together.
In Houston, a lot of the great parks works that are being done, there's big philanthropists that are making those things happen. So this is public-private partnerships. And just like here, that's happened, right? Highline's a big example of that. But what's happened with those things is it has put a lot of emphasis on call them the boutique parks, right? The ones that everyone wants to be associated with and wants to be a part of, which we need those. But I think the big issue is trying to get people to consider the little small neighborhood park, right? That's seemingly less significant, less boutique-y, less interesting, but would provide much more need or resolve needs, right, within those communities. I think trying to get designs to move in that direction is a challenge, but I think that's something we should be all designing towards.
Yeah, I think that as a result of that, what we're finding is that parks sort of become this commodity or a brand, and that's really great for the field of landscape architecture, but it does create these effects that we never maybe planned or intended with the cost of gentrification and so on, and so there needs to be a kind of continued conversation like this around how we create policy that helps balance some of those investments, but also keeping the neighborhoods, comfortable and accessible.
Great.
But what Nancy pointed out was the desire of the city of New York to make sure that all parks are well maintained and invested in. I think maybe she should talk about that.
Yeah, that's why we focused on the small parks, and with this initiative for the Community Parks Initiative, it got us to work in neighborhoods that didn't have a lot of, a lot of people really wanting the parks, or a lot of power. We put the money not where the power was, and that was really exciting, and then to bring the community out. And one of the things that I think is the hardest in New York is cars. And I think maybe the future is changing, because the space we need in the Bronx to connect parks, right now that's used by private cars. And maybe I'm thinking far into the future of being able to connect. Because in New York, that's the space that's left to us, is the street and the sidewalk.
Well, you are so prescient. You answered my third and final question, which is, what does innovative design look like in your minds in 2050, innovative park design? And you think probably dealing with cars and more, getting cars completely out of parks. Any other thoughts?
Well, I can go on and on, but I've been talking a lot about autonomous cars, and not so much the technology and all the ethics and stuff behind it, but what does it do to the urban fabric of a city? And it's a huge deal that cities are not really grappling with, but potentially, a car that it's a robot, can drive itself. Travel lanes are, about 2/3 of what you need. They travel very closely together. So there's going to be found space in cities that, unless we have some way to actually figure out what to do with that space, it's going to become these feral landscapes, right? Maybe it's rewilding of cities as a part of it, but it's potentially a very big deal that's just sort of looming out there, waiting for designers and policymakers to jump on.
Yeah, I think the word accessibility has been used a lot today too, and I think whether that's accessibility to green space, accessibility in terms of porosity and being able to get through a city in a safe and comfortable way, being able to learn how to ride a bike, and all sorts of different levels. It seems to be something that could, I guess, in a way, take us back to a different time, like 100 years ago, where we were all walking and sort of stitched in with our neighborhoods. So by looking back, maybe we can see a different texture and grain on the street.
Great.
And I'd like to emphasize this idea of integration that we've heard so frequently. If one goes to Medellin, Colombia, and see how they integrated a new transportation form, which was the cable car, with public space at the stations, they built a whole community around this infrastructure and integration. I think that integration idea is really important.
Great. So we have time for one or two quick questions if anybody would like to ask, and I believe we have folks that have microphones at the top. You've got some of the most preeminent thought leaders here. You've got to have a question. Yes.
Can you speak a little bit more about thinking through play? Like when I saw the images, we've been thinking about play spaces. You often also get bogged down in how litigious society is, right? So how do you, looking at your images of Governor's Island, I was thinking on the one hand, that looks amazing. Like my kids would love to be on a rope on logs, 6 feet in the air. But oh my God,
Yeah,
so
they scare
scary.
me, to be honest.
So
I haven't even been on them.
To think about putting someplace, and So, but you talked a lot about play, and looking online at Governor's Island, there's a lot about play.
Yeah.
And that seems like a frontier.
Well, one of the things that we, of course, looked at is in Central Park, there's all these great rock outcroppings, and you see kids running all over them. And if you ever take your kid to any part of nature, they'll be jumping on logs and all this stuff. None of that's to code. But of course, all of our play equipment is. I mean, everything is designed according to the standards, the playground design standards. But what you notice when you begin sort of pushing the limits with this equipment and what it looks like, and we're not going to plop down a pirate ship here, is that actually people pay more attention. You pay more attention to where you're stepping, you learn, you look to see where you're gripping, and so you're actually more engaged with the play. And we had our client was really very open to this and excited about it. And if you think that play looks exciting, wait till the slides open, because at the Hills we have 4 slides, including the tallest and longest slide in all of New York City. But there's a very crazy-looking wooden play structure, and again, it's kids will. I think looking back 100 years ago, kids were given more responsibility. I think through, whether it's through design or through, bad parenting, I don't know. But, they played with fire, you built forts. And so we had a client that was willing to take on that sense of adventure. And, but then again, met all the standards and requirements.
Yeah, if you don't give kids a little place to take some risk, they will do crazy things that take some risk. So we're trying to involve a little bit of risk-taking in our playgrounds, like standing on ropes that move a little bit. It's not as secure.
Amen to that. Yeah, Mother Nature doesn't really adhere to code. So, all right. Well, this has been an amazing conversation, and I want to thank our participants and thank Commissioner Silver for putting together such a terrific day. And we will see you all in a little bit.